I brought a $2 million check to my daughter's door. She looked at it and said, "You think money fixes everything?" Then I heard her inside, laughing on the phone. Guilt cracked her. "We'll deposit it Monday. Then she can go back to her nursing home." I didn't step inside. I turned around, and by the time I reached the car, I knew exactly where that money would go. For 5 years, I had been invisible to her. I missed the graduation, the wedding, the birth of my second grandchild. I learned their names through a stranger's social media. So I sold my father's land he'd worked for 47 years, and walked up to her door with a $2 million check. I thought I was buying my way back into a family. What I discovered was a transaction I never agreed to. This is the story of how a mother became a bank, how a daughter became a debt collector, and what happens when the vault finally closes. To understand how a woman walks away from her only child, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the fight that ended it, but to the lifetime of small cracks that came first. My daughter Claire was born on a Thursday morning in July, 1987. She came into the world with her eyes wide open, as if she'd already decided she wasn't going to miss a thing. Her father, my husband Richard, held her first. He was the one who cut the cord, the one who whispered her name before I could. From that moment, she was his whole world. That's how it's supposed to be. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being part of that picture. Richard worked construction. I worked the front desk at a dental office. We weren't rich, but we had a little house in Bakersfield, a garden he built with his own hands, and a patch of land his father left him. 20 acres of almond trees near Wasco that Richard tended every weekend. He called it our retirement plan, our legacy. When Claire turned 12, she would ride her bike along the dirt paths between the trees, pretending she was a queen surveying her kingdom. I have a photo of her standing beneath a blooming branch, white petals in her hair. I kept it in my wallet for 30 years. Then, Richard got sick. Pancreatic cancer. 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. Claire was 22. She stood at the cemetery in a black dress I'd never seen before, and she wouldn't look at me. I reached for her hand and she pulled it away. I thought it was grief. I thought it would pass. It didn't. 2 months after the funeral, she moved to Pasadena with a man named Derek. She didn't invite me to see her apartment. She didn't call on my birthday. When I tried to visit, she texted one line, "I need space." I gave her space. I waited. I sent Christmas cards, birthday gifts for the grandchild I'd never met, letters I never mailed. I told myself that time would heal whatever had broken between us. But the silence only grew thicker. What I didn't know then, what I only pieced together years later through secondhand conversations and overheard fragments, was that Claire blamed me for Richard's death, for not catching the cancer sooner, for not pushing him to see a specialist when he complained of stomach pain. She believed I had failed him. She believed I had stolen her father, and she would never forgive me. I carried that guilt like a stone in my chest. Every missed birthday, every holiday spent alone with a frozen dinner and a flickering television, every photograph of my grandson posted online that I could only see because a distant relative forgot to block me. I let it all happen because I believed I deserved it. I believed that if I just tried harder, if I just gave more, I could finally purchase my way back into her life. And then the letter came. January of this year. A property developer out of Los Angeles had been buying up farmland in Kern County for a new distribution center. The 20 acres Richard's father had left us, the land I'd held onto for 23 years since Richard died, was now worth $2,100,000. They wanted to close in 30 days. I sat at my kitchen table with the offer letter in one hand and my phone in the other. I scrolled through Claire's social media. There she was, laughing at a restaurant, her son beside her, Derek's arm around her shoulder. They had just bought a new house. I could see the strain in their eyes. The mortgage must have been crushing them. I thought, this is it. This is my way back. I would sell the land, cash out every investment, and walk up to her door with a check that would change everything. She would see how much I loved her. She would let me back in. The sale closed on a Tuesday. I signed the papers with a hand that trembled, not from fear, but from hope. I drove to Pasadena the next morning with the check folded in my purse, a check for $2 million, made out to Claire. I rehearsed what I would say. I imagined her tears, her embrace, the moment she would call me Mom again. I parked across the street from her house and sat for a long moment, watching the curtains shift in the breeze. I saw my grandson's bike on the lawn. I saw a garden gnome I had sent her years ago, still standing by the porch. I walked up the driveway, my heart pounding so loudly I couldn't hear my own footsteps. I rang the bell. The door opened, and there she was. Older, harder, the softness of her childhood long gone. She looked at the check, then at me, and said the 5 words I had dreaded but never prepared for. "You think money fixes everything?" I froze. Before I could answer, she turned away, leaving the door ajar. I heard her voice inside, lifted and sharp, not to me but to someone on the phone. "She actually showed up with a check," she laughed. "Told you the guilt would crack her. We'll deposit it Monday, then she can go back to whatever nursing home she crawled out of." The floor beneath me turned to ice. I saw it then. The years of coldness, the missed birthdays, the photos of my grandchildren I'd only ever seen through a stranger's social media. This wasn't reconciliation. It was a withdrawal, and I was just the account number. I didn't step inside. I didn't hand her the envelope. But I also didn't turn to leave. Not yet, because in that moment, standing on her porch with the check still warm in my blouse pocket, I understood something that transformed the pain into something sharper. I had a choice, one that would define every remaining day of my life. I stood on that porch, the door not quite closed, and I heard my daughter's voice rise over the noise of a television in another room. "No, Mom, not yet. She's just standing there." "But the check is real," I saw the zeros. $2 million. Derek already called the financial advisor. "We'll deposit it Monday morning, clear out the account, and then we don't have to see her again. She'll be gone by Tuesday." Gone, as if I were a pest to be rid of. As if the woman who carried her, who sat through 36 hours of labor, who wept at her first word, who buried her father and then stood alone in that empty house, as if that woman was nothing more than a nuisance at the door. I forced my legs to move. I backed away from the threshold, each step a deliberate act of will. The check was still in my blouse pocket, folded once, crisp and new. I had imagined handing it to her, watching her face soften, feeling her arms around me. I had imagined her saying, "Mom, let's start over." Instead, I got laughter. Cold, dismissive laughter that told me exactly what I was worth. I reached the car and sat behind the wheel for a long time. The sun was high now, bleaching the pavement white. I watched a neighbor walk a dog, watched a delivery truck rumble past. Normal life. Ordinary morning. And I was sitting there, holding a piece of paper that represented every sacrifice I had ever made, every piece of land my husband's father cleared with his own hands, every almond tree that bloomed and died under the California sun. $2 million. And they wanted it like a tip jar. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb. The drive back to Bakersfield takes 2 hours. I spent the first 30 minutes in silence, replaying the sound of her laughter. Then I started talking to Richard. Not out loud, I'm not that far gone, but in my head, I asked him what he would have done. And I heard his voice as clearly as if he were in the passenger seat. "You don't owe anyone your soul, Mari. Not even her." He always called me Mari. It was short for Marilyn, but he said it sounded like the ocean. I reached the halfway point, a dusty gas station off the 99, and I pulled over. I sat in the parking lot and did something I hadn't done in years. I allowed myself to be angry. Not the quiet, simmering kind that eats at your stomach over time, but the hot, clarifying kind that burns away all the fog. She had not just rejected me. She had conspired to extract every last dollar and discard me like a used envelope. And I had almost let her. That's when I made the first decision. The check would not be delivered. Not now, not ever. But I didn't tear it up. That would be satisfying in a cinematic way, but it wasn't enough. Tearing it up meant the money just sat in my account, gathering dust. No, I wanted that money to do something she could never undo. Something that would stand as a monument to the mother she threw away. I pulled back onto the highway and drove the final hour with a new clarity. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the plan was already forming. I didn't need revenge. I needed purpose. I needed to take that money and give it to someone who would actually say thank you. I walked inside, hung my purse on the hook by the door, and went straight to the den. I opened my laptop and searched for the number of my attorney, a man named Gerald Okafor, who had handled Richard's estate 23 years ago. He was retired now, but his son ran the practice. I left a message. Then I sat down and started making a list. Not of grievances, but of memories. Every time I had reached out and been ignored, every birthday card returned unopened, every Christmas spent waiting for a phone call that never came. I wrote it all down, and when I finished, I didn't feel sad. I felt free. The phone rang at 6 o'clock that evening. It was Gerald Jr. I explained what I wanted to do. I wanted to establish an endowed scholarship at the community college where I had once taken night classes, back when Claire was little and I was trying to become a dental hygienist. The scholarship would be for single mothers, women who were working, raising children, and still finding time to sit in a classroom at 8 p.m., because they believed education could change everything. Gerald listened quietly, and then he said, "You're talking about a major gift. $2 million will fund full tuition and stipends for decades. Are you sure?" I told him I had never been more sure of anything in my life. He asked if there was anyone who might contest the decision. I told him the money was mine, free and clear, and the only person who might have expected to inherit it had made her expectations painfully clear. He said he would draw up the papers. The next 3 days passed in a blur of phone calls and signatures. I met with the college foundation director, a woman named Dr. Esther Kim, who cried when I told her the amount. She said they had a waiting list of single mothers who couldn't afford textbooks. She said my gift would change hundreds of lives. I said, good. Let it be the one thing I did right. And then, because I wasn't finished, I did something else. I wrote a letter to Claire. Not an angry letter. I wasn't angry anymore. A letter of explanation. I told her that I had heard her on the phone. I told her that I knew about the plan to deposit the check and then cut me off. I told her that I had not torn up the check, but I had redirected it. I told her that instead of funding her mortgage, the money would now fund the futures of women who would never laugh at their own mothers. I sealed the letter, attached a copy of the scholarship endowment announcement, and dropped it in the mail. Then I waited. 7 days later, a text message appeared on my phone. It was from Claire. "What did you do?" That's all it said. 3 words. No apology, no acknowledgement of the years of silence, just a demand for an explanation I had already provided. I didn't reply. I knew what was coming next. And I was ready. But I was not ready for what I found on her social media page the following morning, because Claire, in her fury, had posted something that made my blood run cold. She had written, publicly, that her mother was mentally unstable, that I had stolen her inheritance, and that she was consulting a lawyer to have me declared financially incompetent. She attached a photo of me, a photo from years ago, taken without my knowledge, and beneath it, she wrote, "If anyone knows how to freeze her accounts before she gives away my father's entire estate, please contact me." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from my bank. A hold had been placed on the scholarship transfer. Pending investigation. And below that, a message from a number I didn't recognize, Mrs. Monroe. "We've been hired to protect your family's interests. Expect a visit." The next morning, I didn't leave the house. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and stared at that bank notification until the words blurred. Hold placed pending investigation. It wasn't just the money, it was the audacity. She had laughed at my gesture, and now she was trying to legally erase my ability to do anything with my own property. At 9:15, a car pulled into the driveway. Black sedan, tinted windows, the kind that whisper of lawyers and trouble. A man in a gray suit stepped out. He was young, maybe 30, with the crisp confidence of someone who bills by the quarter hour. I met him at the door before he could knock. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, handing me a business card. "Kevin Lassiter, Family Asset Protection. I've been retained by your daughter to ensure your financial decisions are being made with sound mind. May I come in?" I didn't move. "You can tell me what you want from the porch." He smiled tightly. "Mrs. Monroe, a petition has been filed for temporary conservatorship. The court will determine whether you are capable of managing your own affairs. Until then, it would be best if you refrained from any large transfers. For your own protection." I felt the blood drain from my face. Conservatorship, the word conjured images of elderly celebrities locked away while strangers drained their accounts. She was trying to have me declared incompetent, not just stop the scholarship, strip me of everything. "Who filed it?" I asked, though I already knew. "Your daughter, Claire Lassiter. She's deeply concerned about your well-being. She believes you're acting irrationally, giving away the family legacy to strangers." The hearing is scheduled for next month. In the meantime, the court has placed a temporary freeze on all accounts over $10,000. The world tilted. She hadn't just frozen the scholarship. She had frozen my entire life, my savings, my retirement, the small checking account I used for groceries, all of it. He must have seen the shock on my face because he softened his tone, just slightly. "Look, Mrs. Monroe, this doesn't have to be messy. If you agree to cancel the scholarship and place the funds in a family trust managed by your daughter, this all goes away quietly. No court, no public embarrassment, just a loving daughter looking out for her mother." I said nothing. I closed the door and locked it. Then I walked to the den, picked up my phone, and called Gerald Okafor. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything. His silence was heavy. Then he said, "Marilyn, this is serious. A conservatorship petition is a blunt instrument. They're going to argue you're vulnerable, isolated, making impulsive decisions. They'll bring evidence. Did you give her any reason to question your mental state? Any emails, texts?" I thought about it. The only thing I had sent was the letter explaining the scholarship. Calm and clear. But she could twist anything. She had a photo of me, posted publicly with a call to freeze my accounts, and now this. "But I have something," I said. "Something they don't know about." Gerald asked what I meant. I told him. When I stood on Claire's porch, when I heard her voice inside laughing, I had the instinct to reach into my purse and press the voice memo button on my phone. I recorded everything. The whole conversation. Her exact words. "We'll deposit it Monday, then she can go back to whatever nursing home she crawled out of." The laughter. The casual cruelty. It was all there, time-stamped and saved. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You recorded it without her consent. California is a two-party consent state. It might not be admissible in court, but..." It could be useful in a different way. If we leak it, the public relations damage alone might make them back off. And if we can get the bank investigator to listen, it might lift the hold. That was the pivot I needed. Not a courtroom victory, a siege on their credibility. My daughter had painted me as a frail, confused old woman. A recording of her laughing about cashing the check and dumping me would shatter that image in an instant. I sent Gerald the audio file. He called back an hour later. I played it for the bank's fraud investigator. The hold is being lifted. The scholarship transfer will go through this afternoon. As for the conservatorship hearing, we'll file a motion to dismiss based on bad faith. But Marilyn, there's something else. Your daughter's petition includes an affidavit from a doctor claiming you've been showing signs of dementia for years. My heart stopped. A doctor. I hadn't seen a doctor in months, not for anything beyond a routine checkup. And my primary care physician, Dr. Halstead, had retired 2 years ago. Who was this doctor? Then Gerald read the name. Dr. Elena Vasquez. I didn't recognize it. I had never met a Dr. Elena Vasquez. But the name was attached to a medical report that described me as disoriented, forgetful, unable to manage finances. The report was dated 3 weeks before Claire even knew I had money to give. This wasn't a desperate reaction to the scholarship. This was premeditated. She had been building a case to take control of my assets before I ever knocked on her door. The land sale, the investment cash out, somehow she had known I was coming into money. How? I sat very still. Then I remembered the property developer. The offer letter. They had called a reference to verify ownership, and my daughter's name had appeared as an emergency contact from an old file. A bank account I'd opened for her when she was 18. They might have contacted her by mistake. She must have known weeks before I showed up that a windfall was coming. And instead of reaching out, instead of asking how I was, she and Derek had begun laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent so they could take it all. The plan had never been reconciliation. It had been a heist from the beginning. The check was just the moment of delivery. They were always going to dispose of me once the money cleared. The nursing home comment wasn't a joke. It was a preview. I felt something shift inside me, colder than anger. I was no longer a rejected mother trying to heal a wound. I was the victim of an attempted crime. And I had the one thing they never anticipated: evidence of their intent, caught on a voice memo they didn't know existed. But that evidence alone wasn't enough to explain the forged medical report. Someone had falsified a diagnosis under a doctor's name. That was a felony. And it meant I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my identity. Because if they succeeded, I would be legally erased, tucked away in a facility with no access to a phone, while they spent the rest of my husband's legacy on vacations and renovations. I asked Gerald to find out who Dr. Elena Vasquez was. He promised to dig. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the window, watching the empty street, waiting for the next knock. But what arrived wasn't a knock. It was a phone call from a blocked number. A woman's voice, low and urgent. Mrs. Monroe? You don't know me, but I used to work for Derek Lassiter's firm. I was told to shred some documents last week, and I didn't. I think you should see them. The woman's name was Sandra. She agreed to meet me at a diner off the interstate, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like it's been on the burner since yesterday. She was young, nervous, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup like it might anchor her to the seat. She slid a manila envelope across the table without a word. Inside were photocopies of emails. Dozens of them. Between Claire, Derek, and a third party I didn't recognize. A man whose signature block read Dr. Lionel Cross, Geriatric Assessment Services. The emails dated back 7 weeks, well before I ever set foot in Pasadena. One thread made the air leave my lungs. We need a diagnosis that will hold up in court. something that justifies immediate conservatorship. Money is no object. Can you have the report ready by the 15th? The reply, I'll need a recent photo and a fabricated patient history. Standard rate applies. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a fiction. The real name was Cross, and he wasn't even a medical doctor. He was a disbarred chiropractor running a side business in fake medical documents for custody battles and inheritance disputes. Sandra had been Derek's administrative assistant. She'd been told to shred the file after the petition was filed. Instead, she made copies. She told me she couldn't live with herself knowing an innocent woman was about to be locked out of her own life. I thanked her. I told her she had just saved me. Then I drove straight to Gerald Okafor's office and placed the envelope on his desk. He read through the emails in silence, his expression shifting from professional concern to something harder. When he finished, he looked up and said, "This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is conspiracy to commit fraud. We're going to the district attorney." That week moved like a tide. Gerald filed an emergency motion to dismiss the conservatorship petition, attaching the emails, the voice recording, and an affidavit from Sandra. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Ngomo, reviewed the evidence in chambers. Within 48 hours, she issued a ruling the petition was denied with prejudice, the temporary freeze on my accounts was lifted, and the matter was referred for criminal investigation. I read the order at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once sat and wept over a text message that told me I wasn't family. This time, I didn't weep. The scholarship transfer cleared the next morning. $2 million moved from my account to the Bakersfield Community College Foundation, earmarked in perpetuity for the Marilyn Monroe Endowed Scholarship for Single Mothers. I received a call from Dr. Esther Kim, her voice cracking. She told me the first awards would be granted that fall, and she asked if I would attend the ceremony. I said yes. But the story didn't end there. Because Claire, facing exposure and potential charges, did what desperate people do. She tried to rewrite the narrative. I learned from Gerald that she had posted a new statement on social media, claiming she had been the victim of a toxic, manipulative mother who had weaponized the legal system to destroy her. She said the emails were fabricated. She said I had orchestrated the whole thing to punish her for setting boundaries. The comments under her post were a battlefield, some supporting her, others turning on her, digging up her old posts, connecting the timeline. Her own words had trapped her. Then, 2 weeks before the scholarship ceremony, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Claire's looping cursive, the same she'd used to write me Mother's Day cards when she was 10. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The letter didn't start with "Dear Mom." It didn't apologize. It said, "I know you think you've won. But you've only proven what I always knew, that you would choose strangers over your own blood. I hope your scholarship makes you happy. You'll die alone, and no one will be there to remember you." I folded the letter carefully, walked to the fireplace, and placed it on the mantel. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. Some people don't change because they can't. Some people need villains so they don't have to face themselves. I wasn't going to be her villain anymore. I wasn't going to be anything to her at all. The scholarship ceremony was held on a warm October evening in the college courtyard. String lights hung between the trees. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. I sat in the front, next to Dr. Kim, wearing a simple navy dress that Richard had once said made me look like the sea. 5 women walked across the stage that night, each one a single mother. The first was a woman named Keisha, who worked overnight shifts at a warehouse and took classes during the day. She had a son who was 6, and she carried him on her hip as she accepted her certificate. She looked at me from the stage, and she mouthed the words, "Thank you." I felt something break open inside me, not pain, but release. After the ceremony, a girl approached me. She was maybe 19, with a baby in a stroller and a textbook tucked under her arm. She said, "Mrs. Monroe, I don't know if you remember me. I used to work at the gas station you stopped at on the 99. You came in one morning looking like you'd been crying. I gave you a free coffee because I thought you needed it. I didn't know your story. I didn't know you were going through something terrible. But I'm one of the scholarship finalists now. And I wanted you to know that your money isn't just helping strangers. It's helping the girl who handed you a coffee when you needed one." I stared at her, and the memory came back. That dusty gas station. The parking lot where I sat and finally let myself be angry. She had been behind the counter, a teenager with tired eyes and a kind smile. She had pushed the cup toward me and said, "Sometimes the world is hard. This one's on me." I never forgot that small kindness, and now it had circled back in a way I couldn't have designed. That was the moment I understood. I had not lost a daughter. I had gained 100 daughters. I had not lost a legacy. I had built one from scratch. But there is one more thing, something I learned only later, after the story had gone quiet. Gerald called me with news. The investigation into Claire and Derek had uncovered something unexpected. The fake doctor, Lionel Cross, had been under federal investigation for years. My case had cracked open a much larger conspiracy, a network of forged medical documents being used to swindle elderly people out of their homes and savings. Because I had come forward, because I had recorded that terrible conversation on the porch, because I had the presence of mind to save myself, the authorities were able to indict Cross and 6 others. My daughter and her husband were not charged. The evidence against them was strong but complicated, and they accepted a deal to cooperate against Cross. But their names were in the public record now, attached to fraud, attached to the attempted exploitation of a widow. I could have pressed harder. I could have pushed for charges. But I didn't. I let the system do its work, and I walked away. Because at some point, you have to decide whether you want justice or whether you want peace. I chose peace. The last image I have of Claire is not the confrontation on the porch. It's a photo I saw online months later, a distant shot of her at a grocery store, her face drawn. Derek not beside her. She looked older. She looked like a woman who had gambled everything and lost. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet, distant sadness, like a bruise that had finally faded. Then I closed the screen and went outside to water my garden. The garden was new. I had planted it that spring, after the ceremony, with cuttings from the almond trees that once grew on Richard's land. I had sold the acreage, but I had kept a few branches, rooted them in pots, and set them along the fence line. They were small now, barely waist high. But they would grow. Given enough time, given enough care, they would bloom white every spring, just like they did when Claire was 12 and believed her kingdom would last forever. I water them every morning. And I talk to Richard. And I tell him that we did something good, something that will outlast us both. And that is enough. That is more than enough. Not every story ends with a reconciliation. Not every wound gets an apology. But some stories end with something rarer, clarity. The kind that arrives not in a thunderclap, but in the quiet morning after a long night, when you realize you're still standing and the world hasn't ended. I didn't get my daughter back. I didn't get the hug, the tears, the words I'd scripted in my head for 5 years. But I got something else. A room of women whose eyes were wet with gratitude. A girl at a gas station who reminded me that kindness circles back. A garden full of almond saplings that will outlive me. And a husband's voice in my memory telling me I was enough. The lie we're told is that family is forever, that no matter what they do, you owe them your everything. I believed that lie for half a century. I gave my time, my grief, my silence. I gave $2 million before I ever handed over that check. I had already given them my dignity. And they took it without a second thought. It took a voice memo on a porch and a forged medical report to finally make me see. Love is not a transaction, and no one gets to set the price of your worth. How many mothers sit alone tonight, scrolling through photos of grandchildren they've never held, waiting for a call that won't come? How many have been reduced to a bank account, an inconvenience, a holiday obligation? The world tells older women to shrink, to be grateful for scraps, to smile and pay the bill and disappear from the photo. But not anymore. Not if we choose differently. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people you loved most, then you're in the right place. This channel is for the women who gave everything and were told it wasn't enough. Here, we reclaim the narrative. We tell the stories no one else will. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories and join a community that knows your worth, even when the world forgets. Because when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens.